Hello everybody, this is Dr. Mike, TCOM 101, Ball State University, and you are watching online video number 16. Happy spring everybody, I hope you're enjoying all the daffodils and the other flowers that are starting to bloom. Hey, in this video we want to take a closer look at the TCOM Act of 1996. In the last video, we talked about how this landmark law had changed the telephone services and cable TV industry. In this video, we'll talk about how the TCOM Act of 1996 set forth new rules for radio and TV and the internet and online services. So first, let's talk about the traditional broadcasters, radio and television stations. The TCOM Act of 1996 was very friendly to the radio and TV industry because it relaxed many of the media ownership rules, the rules that would limit the number of radio or TV stations that one entity could own in America. And there's a good reason to limit station ownership. We wouldn't want one party with one political point of view controlling all of the radio or TV stations in the country. We want diversity in ownership and pluralism, a lot of voices. So, under the TCOM Act of 1996, TV ownership regulations were relaxed. Prior to the law, TV stations were told they could own up to 25% or reach 25% of the national TV audience. Under the TCOM Act of 1996, that limit was raised to 35% of the national audience. Now, that's not where the limit is today, because earlier in this century, back in 2004, the FCC went to Congress and said, let's raise the cap to 45%. Well, Congress examined the situation very closely and came up with this kind of odd compromise number, 39%. So this is technically the current limit on television station ownership in the United States. Ownership cannot reach more than 39% of the national TV audience. Now, the result of this relaxation of ownership limits in TV, the rise of some giant horizontally integrated TV group owners. For example, have you ever heard of this company, Nexstar Media? Nexstar Media is the biggest owner of individual television stations in the United States. In fact, Nexstar owns 196 television stations in more than 100 markets in this country. And in fact, Nexstar owns 7 television stations right here in Indiana in 4 different markets. Here's the Nexstar stations in Indiana. In Indianapolis, there's 2 of them. In Evansville, 2 stations. Fort Wayne, 1 station. And in Terre Haute, 2 different TV stations. So Nexstar has a big presence here in the Hoosier State. Another big TV station owner that's emerged is Sinclair Broadcasting Group, another TV station giant. Now this company is well known for its right-wing political perspective. It's a ultra hyper conservative ideology that this group of stations promotes. Now, not much of a presence in Indiana, but Sinclair Broadcasting Group owns 191 TV stations in about 90 markets. They have 1 TV station here in Indiana, WBST, Channel 22, the CBS affiliate in South Bend. All right, back to the TCOM Act of 1996. Another thing it did was relax most of the ownership limits in the world of radio. Most of the limits on radio ownership were repealed. Now, as a result, we saw incredible concentration occur. And so now we've got companies like iHeartMedia, another horizontally integrated chain of stations, in this case, radio. So iHeartMedia, the nation's #1 radio company, more than 850 radio stations in 150 markets. And iHeartMedia owns 4 powerful radio stations in nearby Indianapolis. Those would be Q95, Alt 103.3, Fox Sports 1260 AM, and Real 98.3. iHeartMedia. Okay, back to the TCOM Act of 1996. Yes, it allowed more big ownership of radio and TV stations. But it also had more provisions. For example, think about this one. Very friendly to radio and TV. Their license term was extended to 8 years. Okay, over time this has grown from 4 to 6 to, imagine 8 years between the times you have to renew your license. That's a long time. Another provision aimed at TV was the idea that all TV sets had to be equipped with something called the V chip, or some people call it the violence chip, the V chip. So under the TCOM Act of 1996, all the new TV sets had to be equipped with this special device called the V chip. Here's a picture of President William Jefferson Clinton, who signed the TCOM Act of 1996 into law. He was a big supporter of the V chip. Well, what's the V chip? The V chip is a device in the TV that allows the parents to block programs. It's the filtering device. It's the way that parents can control their children's viewing behavior to set limits on content. So the V-chip is just the filtering device in a TV set. Now, for the V-chip to work, you have to be able to identify which content should be blocked. Okay, so you have to have some kind of rating system for the TV program. So the TCOM Act of 1996 strongly encouraged the TV industry to come up with a rating system to indicate which programs contain sex, violence, and offensive language so that the V-chip could actually work. You may recognize the TV ratings that are very common today. On every television and cable channel, you'll see the use of these TV ratings. Well, it all comes from the TCOM Act of 1996. So there were new regulations. It wasn't just about deregulation. When you say come up with a TV rating system, you're imposing new regulation. All right, one more topic, the internet and the online world. Did you know the TCOM Act of 1996 included regulations, important regulations, in the battle against online pornography? Ever since the internet came to the general public in the 1990s, people have been very concerned about cyber porn, and especially its impact on children. So, part of the TCOM Act of 1996 was a section called the Communications Decency Act, or the CDA, the Communications Decency Act. And this was the very first attempt by Congress to regulate porn on the internet. Again, the CDA was a section or a part of the TCOM Act of 1996. Well, what did this law do, the Communications Decency Act of 1996? Well, it created criminal penalties, fines, and big fines if somebody was caught transmitting so-called indecent materials on the internet. This was all about trying to protect children from online pornography. Now, there were many people were protesting the Communication Decency Act, that it went too far, that it was not specific enough, that it was vague, that it didn't really define indecency, and therefore it meant that almost everything controversial on the internet could be threatened as so-called indecent speech. So there was a lot of protest at the time. Now, eventually the case went to the United States Supreme Court. This is a classic landmark Supreme Court case, 1997, called Reno versus the ACLU. Reno was Janet Reno. She was the Attorney General at the time. She represented the government in favor of the Communication Decency Act, and the ACLU is the American Civil Liberties Union. They were the lead plaintiff of a whole group of plaintiffs that were opposed to the Communication Decency Act. Okay, not because the ACLU supports pornography; it supports a freedom of expression. Now, within a year, this case was challenged, this law was challenged. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, which handed down a decision. And in the decision, the Communications Decency Act was ruled unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court. Why? Because it was vague in how it defined indecency. Any talk about human sexuality could have been considered indecent under the CDA. The court said that the Communication Decency Act placed an unacceptably heavy burden on protected speech. And the court said the interest in encouraging freedom of expression in a democratic society outweighs any theoretical but unproven benefit of censorship. It's better to have a lot of freedom of expression in society than to have a lot of censorship. So the court said, in effect, that the internet should really be afforded the full First Amendment protections. Now, the court was trying to prevent what we call a chilling effect. This is a situation when you have a vague or overly broad law, and that law might suppress legitimate speech. Why? Because people are afraid to talk. They're stifled or limited because they fear punishment, or they fear that they're not in the popular point of view. So the chilling effect, the courts are very familiar with this idea, and we want to usually prevent any situation in which free speech is killed or toned down or stifled or limited. So the Supreme Court really put a stop to a lot of censorship on the internet. Hey, the issue wasn't dead. Congress immediately tried again. 1998, Congress passed something called the Child Online Protection Act, COPA. And the purpose of that law was to restrict access by minors to indecent and harmful material. But again, this law was too vague. Okay? And so it was struck down pretty quickly by the federal courts. The federal courts ruled in 1999 that COPA violated the constitutional protection of free speech. So another law was determined to be unconstitutional. So Congress tried a third time to protect children from internet pornography, and this was the 2000 Children's Internet Protection Act, CIPA. Now, this law was a little different. It didn't create penalties for distributing pornography and erotica to minors, okay? This was about filtering such material from the users. This was what we call the porn filter law, okay? And this law was upheld by the Supreme Court in 2003, okay? This law said that public schools and libraries, anything that received any federal money, that those entities had to have porn filtering software on their computers. And the Supreme Court okayed this idea, said that it was okay for libraries, schools to try to filter out some of the pornography. So the Supreme Court ruled that the Children's Internet Protection Act did not violate free speech rights under the First Amendment. Okay? So just to sum up kind of the idea of online decency, pornography, and the courts in America. Porn censorship? No. We have a lot of pornography out there in our society. Now, there's a couple of exceptions here. Child porn and something called revenge porn, which we'll talk about in a minute. So there's limits, yes, but most of the erotica is not illegal. But it is okay to have age restrictions and filters on the porn content, all right? Now, revenge porn, that's something that we hear about a lot the last few years. Anyway, revenge porn, you might have heard of this. This is when there's some sexually explicit image of a person posted on the internet without their permission. Usually it comes from some former sex partner, some scorned lover who's trying to get back. And so without the consent of the victim, they post some awful nude picture or some other sort of erotica in order to cause that person distress or embarrassment, to get back, to hurt them. A horrible thing to do. Okay? And there's been a major movement across this country to try and regulate and to end and to shame the people and punish them, those who would do this kind of behavior. So, by last count, 41 of the states have now passed specific laws that outlaw revenge porn. What about Indiana? I'm sad to report that Indiana is not one of those 41 states. Indiana has no specific revenge porn law. Well, at least not yet. We shall see. All right. Now, just want to talk a little bit about the topic of online pornography and erotica. It's very popular, you know. It makes up a huge amount of the bandwidth of the internet. But is it good or bad? Is it dangerous to individuals and society? Why or why not? Do you have a position on this controversial issue? Hey, porn use has gone up a lot right now. It's spiking because of the pandemic. People are home, isolated, lonely, bored. You know, I've read articles that said this is a good thing, right? Virtual sex during the pandemic. All right? But there's a lot of points of view on this. Hey, I wouldn't recommend any kind of activity right now, even if you are using protective gear. Anyway, if you want to learn about the anti-porn crusaders and activists, here's some very interesting websites. The Parents TV Council, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. These groups have been fighting pornography for years. A couple of newer groups have emerged that are kind of led by younger people. One's called Fight the New Drug, and the other one's called Porn Kills Love. Now again, these are the anti-porn crusaders. You may say positive things about pornography, all right? These folks would say that pornography produces a broad range of potential negative effects, that it can be addicting, that it can cause loneliness, that it can affect your sexual taste. Most often it's escalating. We have to find something even more kinky or bizarre or unusual to satisfy us. It can really hurt your partner to know that you're addicted to porn. It can kill love. It can damage your sex life. It may lead to violence in some cases because a lot of the porn, tends to support aggressive behavior towards women, fuel sex trafficking, can warp your ideas about what sexuality and intimacy are really all about. And maybe it promotes a lot of self-centeredness. Masturbation is basically a selfish kind of act, especially when you're in a relationship with somebody else. So, a lot of downsides to all of this, Think about it. Porn can't kiss you, hold you, cry with you, laugh with you, start a family with you, love you, or grow old with you. Well, actually, during the pandemic, nobody should be able to kiss you and hold you and hug you right now. But porn certainly can't fulfill all those basic human needs. So anyway, that's a little lecture on the TCOM Act of 1996 as it applies to radio, TV, and the internet, and even a little bonus discussion about pornography, a controversial issue in the world of the internet and modern society. So that's all for this talk. You take care, stay safe, and I will be back soon with another video for you. Take care. Bye-bye.